I would say that my love for writing emerged from my love for storytelling, and the earliest influences um, that I was immersed in as a child, growing up in a family and a village in which oral storytelling was a rich part of our tradition. Starting with my mother. My mother was a great storyteller. She didn't tell Anansi stories and that kind of thing, but she told stories all the time, little anecdotes and stories, real stories about when she was young or when we children were young, stories about her and other people's encounters with ghosts, stories about her school days. Just throughout the day, my mother told stories for no special occasion. It was just a natural part of her communication process. And I think this is a part of, well, I don't think, I'm sure this is a part of her family trademark. She was an Andrews from City River. That's a Andrews. Then she married Kelly. And the Andrews are great storytellers in my generation. I have cousins like Patricia and Ava, Desiree, Horace, who are also Andrews, my mom's nieces and nephews, and they are fantastic storytellers. And then on my father's side of the family, I have been told that my grandfather, Daniel White, was a great storyteller, a great oral storyteller. And he specialized in these fantastic, tall tales, these exaggerated stories. And somehow he always was the hero in these stories. My sister-in-law, Myrna Foreman Andrews, has memorized a lot of his stories. And nowadays, when we get together for family gatherings, Myrna is our family storyteller now, and she regales us with countless stories that she learned from my grandfather when she was little. And and then everybody who grew up in my generation in City River will tell you that Buddy Trap, I think his name was Herbert Trap, but we all knew him as Buddy Trap, was our favorite storyteller in the village. The teachers used to invite him, I remember, from time to time to the school to tell us stories. And then, he would just meet you in the road randomly and, regale you with Anansi's stories and these delightful little rhymes. And so, yeah, I grew up in a very rich storytelling culture, which I think was typical of my generation in Belize, and certainly I believe that that was the foundation of my love for writing, because essentially I think that a writer is a storyteller first and foremost. I've been influenced as a writer by all of the writers whose works have delighted me, from Dr. Seuss to Dr. Maya Angelou. I remember as a child just being lost in the magical worlds created by writers, and so definitely other any writer who has sparked my imagination has been an important influence. But if I had to name some names, I did put together a list because it's a frequently occurring question. So, list of writers who have, I think, directly inspired me as a writer, who have caused me to fall in love over and over with the written word. Like I said, Dr. Seuss, the master of rhymes and delightful play with words. Up to this day, Green Eggs and Ham is still my favorite children's book. And up to this day, I still don't like Green Eggs and Ham. as a child and teenager, I also loved reading Michael Anthony, V.S. Naipaul, Z. Edgell, Chinua Achebe, Charles Dickens, James Herriot, Maya Angelou. Those were writers who took me away to faraway places and made me fall in love with characters. Maya Angelou and James Herriot's writing, specifically, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, was the first memoir I ever read as a early teen, and then James Herriot's All Creatures Great and Small. He was an English vet whose book just randomly showed up at our house. I think somebody gave us some books when we were little, and All Creatures Great and Small was the first novel I ever read, even before reading the popular childhood favorites like the Nancy Drew and Hardy Boys series. James Herriot was my first like big people reading, along with Maya Angelou. So certainly, I also read lots of romance novels. Should not probably have been reading those at such an early age, but they were important influences, and again, just greatly entertaining and great examples, I think, of how to write, page-turning plots and, memorable characters. And so, in terms of my use of Caribbean Creole and Belize Creole, the writers who I studied deliberately and who have inspired me thus have been Z. Edgell, certainly, V.S. Naipaul, Sam Selvon, Evan Hyde, and Colin Hyde of Belize, Kalila Enriquez Reynolds, Kai Miller, one of the young, very popular Caribbean writers today, along with Joanne Hillhouse, Kevin Jared Hussein, fantastic youngish writers. And then, of course, in my Creole usage, of which I have been engaging more and more these days, has been largely inspired and aided by the writings of Colville Young and my friend Sylvana Odds. In embracing my mother tongue in my literature, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, the Kenyan writer, has been a huge inspiration for me. Since the 1980s, Wa Thiong'o has written exclusively in his Gikuyu mother tongue, one of the Kenyan languages now, and he is one of the most well-known African writers today and a great advocate for mother tongue writing, and so he's been a great example to me in that regard. Other Caribbean and Latin American writers who I admire greatly are Olive Senior and Cristina Garcia, the Cuban-American writer. Her novel Dreaming in Cuban is one of my absolute favorite novels. And being a journalist or a former journalist herself, Cristina Garcia is a wonderful wordsmith, and I look at her as one of the writers who, along with those I have listed previously, all of them have inspired me to want to continue writing, or to try out this technique and that technique, and to just marvel in the joys and the magic of the written word. And then, of course, as far as influences on me as a writer, I cannot forget those professors who have nurtured me, not only nurtured me as a writer, but have also been great exemplars of just wonderful human beings. Primarily Liza Wieland, Margaret Bauer, and Alex Albright, three of my former professors at East Carolina University. They have been important sources of encouragement to me as a writer and a student of writing. I think writers and literature can play and should play a pivotal role in preserving and celebrating our beautiful national languages, especially our indigenous languages. I recall that last year was declared by the United Nations as the Year of Indigenous Languages. And in an article that I read on a report by the United Nations, more than 2,000 languages, indigenous languages, are in danger of dying every day around the world, which I think is quite alarming. And two of the factors that contribute to the dying out of languages are, one, when a language is used by only a small or isolated group of people, it's endangered. And also when a language remains primarily oral and isn't used extensively in written form, that language is endangered. And so by those tokens, one can argue that all of our indigenous languages in Belize are at risk of dying out, including our Creole lingua franca. It is quite possible that in generations to come, Creole can disappear from Belize. So can Garifuna and Quechua and Mopan and all of our indigenous languages, given the ever-increasing influences of world languages, especially English and Spanish in our region. And so I think it is imperative upon us as writers to produce great contemporary literature, not only in Spanish and English. Certainly we cannot eschew those international languages, but also simultaneously in our mother tongues. And so yes, in a small population such as ours, literature of all genres are an important part of language preservations, and I look forward to continuing to collaborate with other cultural activists and writers in ensuring that a robust body of Belizean literature is written in our mother tongues. During this COVID-19 shutdown of the country here in Belize, I have made sort of my mantra, along with many other people, but I have been repeating this adage to the few students who have remained active and have volunteered to continue working. As you know, all schools are officially on pause at the moment, but at UB, where I teach composition and creative writing, some students have volunteered to continue progressing through the course materials. And in emails to them, I keep encouraging them by using this wise old saying that when life gives you lemon, make lemonade. And so indeed, right now in Belize and throughout the world, we are suffering myriad hardships, as a result of the pandemic here. And so then it is, I think, although very challenging times, it is also an opportunity for us writers to produce authentic and heartfelt, reflective, creative nonfiction works, especially as we reflect on our experiences during this pandemic. It so happens that in one of my college English 1 classes at UB, two of the questions that I assigned just before we went on lockdown were directly, I think, not related to this matter and can potentially produce some significant essays and personal reflections. One of the questions I posed to students for the final research paper, a causal analysis essay, says something like, what have been the positive and negative effects of tourism in your particular village, town, city, or district? That's one of the questions. And then on the spot, we decided to add a second option for that essay, which is what have been some of the positive results of the corona epidemic, both around the world and in Belize. And so, for better or for worse, well, I can say sadly, students will be able to respond to both of those questions by drawing upon personal experiences. But again, that those are lemons that can be made into lemonade, and that I believe can be made into wonderful works of creative nonfiction writing, or a research paper as that specific assignment requires. And yeah, so I am really looking forward to seeing how students are able to not only inform but also inspire and create connections with their readers as they delve into their experiences. In Belize, the one national event or hardship that we can compare, sort of, not exactly, but in a way, to this time in our lives too, is, well, for us in our generation, Jose, our parents and grandparents have told us a lot about Hurricane Hattie, and so we do not, however, have a whole lot of literature extensively covering and fiction and nonfiction, creative nonfiction, which are the two genres that you've asked me about. We don't have a whole lot of Hattie Chronicles. But today we have the golden opportunity to produce, us writers, both budding writers such as my students and writers such as you and I and other published Belizean writers, to create a robust body of creative nonfiction works inspired by Corona Chronicles, I suppose. And so yes, upheavals and challenges and historical hardships are always lemons that writers typically turn into lemonade. And I'm looking forward to a groundswell, see what happens. When I think of that question, I can't help but reflect on the fact that, I'm recording this interview with you at my dining table and with, my living room in the background. And so I'm thinking not only about the intimacy between writers and readers, but to extend that idea to other professionals in the communications business, including journalists like yourself. And I'm thinking about the myriad home videos and that have been broadcasted by journalists from their home offices or from their living rooms. And not only journalists, but our Prime Minister the other day videoed did a video from inside of his house, and you don't get any more intimate than that, or you hardly get more intimate than that, than getting a little peek into the home life of writers and journalists and politicians. And so certainly these times, these coronavirus quarantine times have perhaps ushered in an era where we get a little glimpse of the personal spaces of professionals and writers, and just the idea that we are neighbors. When I saw, for example, my friend and fellow Belizean writer, now a great journalist doing great work in Jamaica, Kalila Enriquez Reynolds. She's been recording her videos, Money Mondays, on YouTube, that airs on YouTube weekly from home. And I was joking with my daughter the other day, and I said, now I know what Kalila's couch looks like, So there is, that this lockdown at home and being forced to work at home kind of, opens up the opportunity for us to share at least a sliver of our home lives with our readers. And so all in all, the silver lining, the silver lining.